Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to kick off our presentation today. The topic is organism and population. This first slide is our cover slide, so I just want to briefly introduce what we'll be exploring. We'll look at the basics of organisms and how populations grow and interact. Over the next few slides, we'll cover key concepts, examples, and important ideas to deepen our understanding. Let's get started. Let's now turn our attention to the concept of biomes. Biomes are large ecological areas characterized by specific climate conditions, plant communities, and animal populations. Understanding biomes helps us grasp how different ecosystems are structured across the planet and how they support various forms of life. As we explore this, keep in mind that the distribution of biomes is largely influenced by abiotic factors such as temperature, precipitation, and soil type. Recognizing these factors allows us to see why certain plants and animals thrive in specific regions. This understanding forms the foundation for more detailed discussions on populations, their interactions, and how they adapt within these environments. So, by studying biomes, we get a big-picture view of the diversity and complexity of life on Earth, which ties directly into the overall theme of ecology. Today, I want to focus on the concept of ecology. Ecology is essentially the study of how living organisms interact with each other and with their environment. It's about understanding the delicate balance that sustains life on Earth. When we talk about ecology, we're looking at the connections between plants, animals, and their surroundings, and how these relationships influence the health of our planet. This is especially important because the way we impact our environment can disrupt these natural systems. By understanding ecology, we can better appreciate the importance of conservation and sustainable practices. It ties directly into our overall theme of sustainability and responsible resource management. Recognizing the interconnectedness of all living things helps us see why protecting ecosystems is vital for our future. Ecology is the branch of science that studies the relationship between organisms and their physical and biological environment. What does that mean exactly? Well, it's about understanding how living things, like plants, animals, and even microscopic organisms, interact with each other and with their surroundings. This includes things like air, water, soil, and other living organisms. It's important because these relationships shape the health of our ecosystems and, ultimately, the health of our planet. When we talk about ecology, we're really exploring the complex web of connections that sustain life on Earth. So, in essence, ecology helps us see how everything is interconnected, how organisms depend on their environment, and how changes in one part can affect the whole system. This understanding is key as we move forward in addressing environmental challenges and working towards sustainability. Let's delve into what an ecosystem really is. It's a biological system in nature, made up of a biotic community, meaning all the living things, and their physical environment, which includes non-living components like soil, water, and air. These parts are interconnected through energy exchange and nutrient recycling, keeping the system functioning smoothly. Now, within this ecosystem, we have what's called a biological community. This community is essentially a collection of populations, groups of individuals belonging to the same species, that live together in a particular area and interact with each other. The specific composition and structure of these species define the uniqueness of each community. Speaking of populations, they are simply groups of individuals of the same species occupying a certain area at the same time. This concept helps us understand how species are distributed and how they grow or decline over time. And what about a species itself? A species is a group of organisms that share similar features and have the potential to interbreed and produce fertile offspring. This reproductive capability is what keeps the species genetically connected. Finally, at the most fundamental level, we have organisms, the individual living entities. Studying organisms is the basic unit of ecology, allowing us to understand their interactions with each other and their environment. All of these levels, organisms, populations, species, and communities, are interconnected parts of the broader ecological system. Recognizing this hierarchy helps us appreciate the complexity and balance within ecosystems, which is central to understanding ecological dynamics. Let's talk about the environment. The environment is basically the total of all the biotic and abiotic factors that surround and can influence an organism. When we say biotic factors, we're referring to living things, while abiotic factors include non-living components like temperature, water, light, and soil. These are the main abiotic factors that shape an organism's surroundings. Moving a bit broader, the environment also encompasses the sum of all the biomes on Earth. Biomes are large regions characterized by their vegetation and the specific fauna adapted to those conditions. Now, within this environment, each organism has what we call an ecological niche. This is a pretty important concept because it describes the range of conditions an organism can tolerate, the resources it uses, and its role within the ecosystem. What's interesting is that each species has a unique niche. No two species occupy exactly the same one. This helps reduce competition and allows biodiversity to thrive. Finally, let's clarify what we mean by habitat. A habitat is simply the place where an organism lives. It provides the necessary resources and conditions for the organism to survive and reproduce. So, while the environment includes all the factors and regions, the habitat is more about the specific location suitable for a particular species. Understanding these concepts is key to grasping how organisms interact with their surroundings and how ecosystems are structured. Now, let's turn our attention to biomes, which are the large-scale ecosystems characterized by specific climate conditions and distinctive plant and animal communities. As we explore this slide, you'll see that biomes are fundamental to understanding Earth's biodiversity. Each biome has unique features that influence the types of species that can thrive there, whether it's the lush rainforests, expansive deserts, or cold tundras. Recognizing these differences helps us appreciate how life adapts to different environments and how these ecosystems are interconnected. Throughout our presentation, keep in mind that biomes are a key piece of the puzzle in understanding the balance and health of our planet. Large ecosystems are called biomes. Each biome is identified by its climax community, which is the final, stable community that develops in an environment. The boundaries of these biomes are primarily determined by altitude and latitude, meaning how high you are above sea level and how far north or south you are on the globe. Annual variations in the intensity and duration of temperature and precipitation play a crucial role in shaping these major biomes. Changes in weather patterns over the year influence which plants and animals can survive in each biome. Now, looking at the table, we see different types of biomes listed along with their typical locations and vegetation. For example, the tundra is found in cold regions and is characterized by lichens, mosses, and grasses. As we move south from the tundra, we encounter the northern coniferous forest, which includes pines, deodars, and cypress trees. In the center, we have the temperate deciduous forest, where oak trees dominate. In the plains and low, hilly areas, tropical deciduous forests grow, with species like sal, teak, and tondu. Near the equator, the tropical rainforests are home to hopia trees and a rich diversity of plant life. Along the Pacific coasts of America and Australia, the Mediterranean forests feature small trees and shrubs. In South America and southern Australia, the tropical savanna is characterized by coarse grasses and large trees, creating a distinct grassy landscape. Moving on, the grasslands are extensive areas dominated by grasses, providing important grazing lands. Deserts, found in Asia and North Africa, are marked by very low rainfall and specialized plants and animals adapted to dry conditions. Understanding these biomes helps us see how Earth's ecosystems are interconnected and how climate influences the distribution of life across the planet. Let's take a closer look at the major grasslands around the world. These ecosystems, often overlooked, actually play a crucial role in our planet's health. They cover vast areas and support a diverse range of plant and animal species. Grasslands are incredibly important for carbon storage, which helps regulate our climate. They also provide essential resources like grazing land for livestock and crops for human consumption. As we explore these major grasslands, it's vital to understand both their ecological significance and the challenges they face, such as overgrazing and climate change. Recognizing their importance helps us see why protecting these areas is so critical for maintaining biodiversity and supporting sustainable livelihoods. Now, let's take a closer look at some of the major grasslands around the world, starting with the prairies, which are primarily found in North America. These vast, open spaces are known for their rich soils and diverse ecosystems. Moving southward, we have the Pampas in South America, famous for their fertile plains that support extensive agriculture and cattle grazing. In Europe and Asia, you'll find the steppes. These are expansive, semi-arid regions that stretch across many countries, playing a crucial role in their local climates and cultures. Then, there are the tussocks in New Zealand, characterized by their unique grassy tussocks that dominate the landscape, supporting local wildlife. Lastly, the veldts in Africa, which are open, often bushy grasslands, essential for the continent's biodiversity and pastoral activities. Recognizing these different grasslands helps us understand their importance in global ecosystems and their influence on human livelihoods across continents. Now, let's take a look at the factors affecting ecology. As we've discussed, ecology is all about the interactions between living organisms and their environment. But what exactly influences these interactions? Well, there are several key factors to consider. First, climate plays a huge role. Things like temperature, rainfall, and seasonal patterns can dramatically impact ecosystems. Then, we have the availability of resources such as water, nutrients, and food, which directly affect how species survive and thrive. Human activities are also a major factor. Things like urbanization, pollution, and deforestation can alter natural habitats and disrupt ecological balance. Additionally, natural events like wildfires, storms, or volcanic eruptions can influence ecological dynamics significantly. All of these factors are interconnected and shape the health and stability of ecosystems. Recognizing these influences helps us understand the complexity of ecology and underscores the importance of maintaining a balance within our environment. Now, let's turn our attention to abiotic factors. These are the non-living components of an environment that still have a huge impact on living organisms. On this slide, you'll see the number 5, which indicates their importance in our overall understanding of ecosystems. Abiotic factors include elements like temperature, sunlight, water, soil, and climate conditions. These factors shape the habitats available to plants and animals, influencing where they can live and how they survive. For example, the amount of sunlight affects photosynthesis in plants, while water availability determines which species can thrive in a specific area. Recognizing these abiotic elements helps us understand the delicate balance within ecosystems and how changes, like a shift in climate, can have far-reaching effects on all living things. Essentially, abiotic factors are the foundation upon which the living components of an ecosystem depend. Let's talk about how temperature influences organisms. Some organisms, which can only survive within a very narrow temperature range, are called stenothermal organisms. These are quite sensitive to temperature changes and thrive only within specific conditions. On the other hand, there are organisms that can tolerate a much wider range of temperatures. These are known as euthermal organisms. They are more adaptable to different thermal environments. Now, why does temperature matter so much? Well, it directly affects the physiological functions and even where organisms can live geographically. For instance, temperature influences the kinetics of enzymes, which are crucial for metabolic processes. It also impacts the basic metabolic rate, or BMR, and various other physiological actions. So, based on how organisms respond to temperature, we classify them into these two categories: stenothermal and euthermal. Recognizing these distinctions helps us understand their survival strategies and how they adapt to their environments. It all ties back to the overall theme of how organisms cope with their surroundings and maintain their physiological balance. Let's take a closer look at some fascinating adaptations in animals related to their environment. Fishes that live in cold water tend to have more vertebrae compared to those in warmer water. This is actually explained by Jordan's rule, which suggests that colder environments promote certain physical traits. Now, moving on to animals from colder climates, according to Allen's rule, they often have shorter ears and limbs. This helps minimize heat loss, which is crucial in such environments. Additionally, Bergman's rule states that birds and mammals tend to attain larger body sizes in colder regions and smaller ones in warmer areas. This size variation is another way organisms adapt to their climate. And throughout all these examples, what's really key is the concept of homeostasis. It's the process by which organisms maintain a stable internal environment despite external changes, like temperature. Temperature, in particular, influences many physical features in different animals, helping them survive and thrive across diverse habitats. Let's talk about how animals' coloration varies across different regions. Generally, animals in tropical regions tend to be darker and more heavily pigmented compared to those in Arctic regions. This difference is actually explained by a principle known as Glöger's rule. Basically, it suggests that the darker pigmentation in tropical animals helps them adapt to their environment, possibly by providing better camouflage or protection against the sun. Conversely, animals in colder, Arctic regions tend to have lighter coloration, which can help with insulation and avoiding detection in snow and ice. This variation in pigmentation is a fascinating example of how species adapt to their surroundings, reinforcing the overall theme of how environmental factors drive evolutionary changes. Let's take a look at how bird wing shapes vary across different climates. Birds from colder regions tend to have narrower wings, which are more streamlined. This adaptation helps them fly more efficiently in windy, harsh conditions. In contrast, birds from warmer regions usually have broader wings, which provide better lift and maneuverability in less extreme environments. Now, this variation in wing shape ties into a broader concept known as Rensch's rule. Rensch's rule describes how size differences between species tend to change with body size, often reflecting environmental pressures. In this context, it highlights how different ecological conditions, like temperature, influence physical traits such as wing width. Understanding these patterns is important because it shows how species adapt morphologically to their habitats. It's a fascinating example of how environmental factors shape physical characteristics to optimize survival and efficiency. So, in essence, the narrow wings of birds in colder regions are a perfect illustration of how natural selection tailors anatomy to meet specific climatic challenges. Let's take a closer look at the thermal stratification in lakes. First, at the bottom, we have the basal region, which is characterized by low temperatures. This is known as the hypolimnion. It's the coldest part of the lake, and because it's deep down, it remains relatively stable in temperature. Moving upward, we encounter the transition zone called the metalimnion. This is where the most significant temperature change occurs. It's essentially the layer where the temperature shifts rapidly from cold to warmer water, acting as a kind of thermal buffer. Finally, at the very top, we have the epilimnion. This surface layer is directly exposed to solar radiation, so it tends to be warmer and is more affected by weather conditions. These three layers, hypolimnion, metalimnion, and epilimnion, together illustrate how lakes are stratified based on temperature, which has important implications for aquatic life and nutrient dynamics throughout the year. The nature and properties of soil are actually influenced by a couple of key factors, mainly climate and weathering processes. These elements play a crucial role in shaping what soil is like in different areas. Now, the process through which soil forms by breaking down rocks is called pedogenesis, which is essentially nature's way of transforming solid rock into soil suitable for plants. The physical and chemical properties of soil are really important because they determine what kinds of plants can grow in a particular habitat. For example, some soils might be rich in nutrients and well-drained, supporting lush vegetation, while others might be more acidic or less fertile. Understanding these properties helps us see how soil is connected to the broader environment and climate, which ties into the overall theme of how natural processes shape our ecosystems and influence plant growth. So, when we look at soil formation, it's interesting to see how different agents contribute to creating various types of soil. For example, soil made through wind is called aeolian soil. This happens when wind erodes and deposits particles, forming soil over time. It's quite significant in arid and semi-arid regions where wind is a dominant force. Next, we have soil formed through gravity, known as colluvial soil. Think of it as materials that have moved downhill due to gravity, often accumulating at the base of slopes or cliffs. This type of soil is common in mountainous areas, and it can include a mix of different particles and debris. Then there's soil made through ice, called glacial soil. This forms when glaciers grind over rock and soil, transporting and depositing it as the ice advances and retreats. Such soils are typical in glacial regions and can be quite rich in mineral content. Finally, water plays a key role in soil formation too. Water-formed soil is called alluvial soil, which is deposited by rivers and streams. You often find this type of soil in floodplains and river valleys, where water action constantly transports and deposits sediments. So, as we see, the agents involved, wind, gravity, ice, and water, each play a vital role in shaping the different soils around us. Recognizing these helps us understand the diverse landscape formations and the processes behind soil development. Let's take a closer look at the soil profile. Starting from the top, we have the O layer, which is rich in humus content, providing essential nutrients for plant growth. Beneath that is the A layer, known as the topsoil, where mineral particles and organic matter mix, making it the most fertile zone. Moving down, we encounter the B layer, or subsoil, which contains bigger soil particles and is often less rich in organic material. Below that lies the R layer, which consists of unweathered parental rocks that form the foundation of the soil profile. Finally, at the very top, we see weathered rocks, which have undergone physical and chemical breakdown over time. This vertical section visually represents how soil develops and varies in composition from the surface down to the bedrock, helping us understand its overall structure and fertility. Now, let's look at the different stages of organic matter decomposition in the soil. Fully decomposed litter is called humus. This is the rich, dark organic material that results from the complete breakdown of plant and animal remains. Humus plays a crucial role in maintaining soil fertility because it helps retain moisture and nutrients. Next, we have partially decomposed litter, which is known as duff. Duff is in an intermediate stage. It's broken down more than fresh litter, but hasn't fully turned into humus yet. And then we have freshly fallen plant and animal material, which is called detritus or litter. This is the initial organic matter that arrives on the soil's surface before decomposition begins. All these components, litter, duff, and humus, are parts of soil organic matter, which is essential for soil health and productivity. Understanding these stages helps us appreciate how organic material influences soil structure, nutrient cycling, and overall ecosystem functioning. Now let's take a closer look at the process of decomposition. When detritus breaks down into simpler organic substances, this process is facilitated by bacterial and fungal enzymes, and we call this catabolism. It's essentially the breakdown of complex organic matter into more basic compounds. As this happens, inorganic nutrients are released in a process known as mineralization. This is important because these nutrients become available for uptake by plants and other organisms. Water-soluble inorganic nutrients then move into the soil, a process called leaching, which helps distribute these nutrients throughout the soil profile. Over time, dark-colored substances called humus accumulate. Humus is vital because it improves soil fertility and structure. The entire process of breakdown involves several key steps, including fragmentation, where detritus is broken into smaller particles, and humification, which leads to the formation of humus. It's also worth noting that the breakdown of complex organic matter into simpler substances is what we broadly call decomposition. These steps, fragmentation, Mineralization, humification, and leaching all work together to recycle nutrients and maintain soil health, which is essential for sustaining ecosystems and supporting plant growth. Let's talk about small herbaceous plants and some shrubs that live under the canopy of forest trees. These plants have a special adaptation. They are able to perform photosynthesis even under very low light intensities. We often refer to these as psophytes, which is a term that highlights their ability to thrive in shaded, low-light environments. Light, as you know, is a complex physical environmental factor. It's incredibly important because it's an abiotic factor, meaning non-living, that directly influences autotrophs, the organisms that produce their own food through photosynthesis. Understanding how these plants adapt to low light helps us appreciate the diverse strategies life employs to survive and thrive in different environmental conditions. It also ties into the bigger picture of how plants interact with their surroundings and optimize photosynthesis under various light levels. Organisms that can tolerate a narrow range of salinity are called stenohaline organisms. These creatures are quite sensitive to changes in their environment's salinity levels. On the other hand, organisms that can handle a much wider range of salinity are known as euryhaline organisms. This ability allows them to survive in diverse habitats, such as estuaries where salinity fluctuates frequently. Now, understanding these differences is crucial because salinity is just one of the many factors that influence aquatic life. Water quality, including its chemical composition, pH, temperature, and salinity itself, plays a vital role in determining where different organisms can thrive. Ultimately, the productivity and distribution of aquatic organisms depend heavily on these water conditions. Recognizing how organisms adapt to or tolerate various water parameters helps us better understand the complexity of aquatic ecosystems and their overall health. Now, let's talk about how organisms respond to abiotic factors. Abiotic factors are the non-living parts of the environment, like temperature, light, water, and soil chemistry. These factors can significantly influence where an organism can survive and thrive. For example, many plants have adapted to cope with extreme temperatures by developing special features, like thick leaves or protective coverings, that help them conserve water or resist cold. Animals, on the other hand, often have physiological or behavioral responses. Think of how some animals become active during cooler parts of the day or year to avoid heat stress or extreme cold. It's important to recognize that these responses are crucial for the survival of species within their habitats. They help organisms maintain homeostasis, keeping their internal conditions stable despite external changes. Understanding these responses also ties back to the overall theme of how living things interact with their environment. It highlights the incredible adaptability of life and the ongoing struggle to survive amid changing abiotic conditions. Some organisms are able to maintain homeostasis through physiological, or sometimes behavioral, means. This helps them regulate body temperature and keep their osmotic concentration constant. Essentially, these mechanisms ensure that internal conditions stay stable despite environmental changes. All birds and mammals are examples of regulators, meaning they actively control these vital parameters. Interestingly, a very few lower vertebrates and invertebrates also fall into this category. Recognizing these regulators is key to understanding how organisms adapt to their environments and maintain internal balance, which ties directly into the broader theme of homeostasis and organism survival. The majority of animals, and almost all plants, are unable to maintain a constant internal environment. This means that their body temperature tends to change along with the temperature of their surroundings. These organisms are known as conformers. Essentially, they conform to the temperature conditions around them, rather than regulating their internal temperature independently. This is an important concept because it highlights the diversity of strategies that different organisms use to survive in their environments. Understanding conformers helps us see how some species adapt by allowing their internal conditions to vary, which can be an advantage in stable or predictable environments. It's a key part of the broader picture of how organisms maintain homeostasis, or sometimes choose not to, and how they fit into their ecosystems. Hairs on the body act as heat insulators, helping animals retain warmth in colder environments. When we look at smaller organisms, their surface area is quite large compared to their volume, which means they lose heat more quickly. In contrast, larger animals have a smaller surface area relative to their volume, making it easier for them to control their body temperature. This difference plays a crucial role in how different species adapt to their environments. Larger animals can better regulate their body temperature because they lose less heat relative to their size. This concept of size and surface area is fundamental in understanding how animals survive and thrive in various climates. It's all part of how animals have evolved to manage their internal temperature effectively. Now, let's talk about migration. Organisms have this fascinating ability to temporarily move away from a stressful habitat to a more comfortable area. This kind of movement allows them to escape unfavorable conditions, whether it's extreme weather, scarcity of food, or other threats. The key point here is that migration isn't permanent. It's a strategic, often seasonal, response. Once the stressful period is over, these organisms can return to their original habitat. This behavior is a great example of how animals adapt and survive in changing environments, which ties into the larger theme of understanding how species cope with stress and ensure their survival. On this slide, we're looking at a stage called suspended development, which is observed in many zooplankton. This is a survival strategy where they essentially pause their development to avoid unfavorable environmental conditions. Now, this process is often referred to as diapause. Diapause is a way for animals to escape stress and challenging periods, like the hot summer months. For example, some snails and fishes enter diapause to become inactive during summer, helping them conserve energy and survive until conditions improve. Similarly, we have estivation, which is another form of dormancy. Animals like frogs, lizards, and even some polar bears go into estivation to avoid stress during the winter months. It's like a summer or winter hibernation, depending on the season they're avoiding. Then there's hibernation, which is most often associated with cold winters. Animals like bears and some rodents reduce their metabolic activities drastically to survive the cold, food scarcity, and harsh environment. All these processes, diapause, estivation, and hibernation, are examples of suspension, where organisms suspend their metabolic functions during stressful periods. This suspension helps them survive periods that would otherwise be fatal. So, in summary, suspension is a key survival mechanism, allowing animals that can't migrate to pause their activity until conditions become favorable again. It's a fascinating adaptation that highlights the resilience of different species in the face of environmental challenges. Let's talk about adaptation. Adaptation is all about how we adjust and evolve in response to changing circumstances. It's a key concept because it highlights our ability to stay resilient and flexible in the face of challenges. When we think about adaptation, we're really considering how strategies and behaviors shift to meet new demands. This is crucial because, as we've seen throughout this presentation, change is constant. Being adaptable allows us to not only survive, but thrive in dynamic environments. So, understanding adaptation helps us build more resilient systems and teams, and ultimately supports the overall theme of growth and resilience in this presentation. Adaptation is all about the changes that happen in an organism to help it survive and reproduce in its environment. These changes can be morphological, meaning physical features, physiological, relating to how the body functions, or behavioral, which are the actions or responses the organism exhibits. The key idea here is that adaptations are what allow an organism to thrive in its specific habitat. It's important to understand that these adaptations don't happen overnight. They develop over a long period of time through the process of evolution. And, crucially, these traits are controlled by genes, so they are inherited and passed down through generations. This concept ties into the broader theme of how living things are finely tuned to their environments through gradual changes, making them better suited to survive and reproduce. Adaptations are a fundamental part of the story of life on Earth, showing how species evolve in response to their surroundings. Let's start with the kangaroo rat living in the North American desert. What's fascinating about this animal is that it never actually drinks water. Instead, it meets its water needs through internal fat oxidation. When the fat is broken down for energy, water is produced as a byproduct. This adaptation is crucial for survival in such a dry environment. Additionally, the kangaroo rat can concentrate its urine, minimizing water loss during excretion, which helps it conserve every drop possible. Moving on to desert plants, many have developed unique features to thrive in arid conditions. For example, some have evolved parenchyma tissue, which provides buoyancy and helps with floating, especially in occasional wet conditions. Their leaves are often coated with a waxy covering that reduces water loss through evaporation. Now, let's talk about aquatic plants. They have thick cuticles on their leaf surfaces to prevent water loss, and their stomata are often sunken below the surface to further reduce transpiration. Their leaves may be modified into spines, which also helps minimize water loss. Importantly, many use the CAM pathway for photosynthesis, meaning their stomata stay closed during the day to conserve water and open at night to take in carbon dioxide. These adaptations, whether in animals or plants, highlight how life evolves specialized features to survive in extreme environments, aligning perfectly with our overall theme of adaptation and survival. Let's talk about populations ecology. This is a crucial part of understanding how living organisms interact with their environment and with each other. Essentially, populations ecology focuses on groups of individuals of the same species living in a specific area. It helps us understand how populations grow, shrink, and fluctuate over time. Key concepts here include population size, density, and distribution. We also look at factors that influence these, like resource availability, predation, and competition. Understanding populations ecology allows us to see the bigger picture of ecosystem dynamics and stability. For instance, knowing how a population expands or declines can inform conservation efforts or resource management. It's all about understanding the balance within ecosystems and how various factors influence the survival and growth of species. This ties directly into the overall theme of ecology, which is about understanding the complex relationships that sustain life on Earth. Let's start by looking at the sex ratio, which is expressed as the number of females per 1,000 males in a population at a given time. This ratio helps us understand gender balance in a community, which can have social and economic implications. Next, we have the death rate, also known as the mortality rate. It's expressed as the number of deaths per 1,000 individuals over a specific period. This indicator is crucial for assessing the overall health and living conditions of a population. Then there's the birth rate, or natality rate. This is the number of births per 1,000 people per year. It gives us insight into population growth and reproductive trends within a community. Finally, these are all key population attributes. They help us analyze demographic changes and understand the dynamics that shape societies over time. By examining these factors together, we get a clearer picture of population health, growth, and structure, which ties into the overall theme of understanding population dynamics. Let's take a closer look at the age groups within a population. We divide the population into three main categories: pre-reproductive, reproductive, and post-reproductive. The pre-reproductive group includes those from birth up to 14 years old. The reproductive group covers ages 14 to 44, when individuals are typically capable of having children. And the post-reproductive category includes those aged 45 and above, who are generally past their childbearing years. Now, when we plot the age distribution of a population on a graph, we get what's called an age pyramid. This pyramid visually shows the number of males and females in each age group, usually in a combined diagram. It's a really useful way to understand the structure of a population at a glance. The shape of this pyramid is very telling. It reflects the population's growth status. For example, a wide base suggests a lot of young people, indicating a growing or expanding population. A more uniform shape points to a stable population, while a narrow base and a top-heavy structure can indicate a declining population. Overall, understanding the age pyramid helps us see not just how many people there are, but how the population is changing over time. It's a key tool in demographic studies and planning for social services, healthcare, and future development. Let's take a closer look at population growth. As you can see, this slide highlights some key points about how populations are changing over time. Population growth is a fundamental factor that impacts many aspects of our world, from resource consumption to urban development. When populations increase, there's often a ripple effect, more demand for housing, food, and services, which can strain existing infrastructure. Conversely, in areas where population growth slows or declines, we might see different challenges, like aging populations or shrinking workforces. Understanding these trends helps us better grasp the bigger picture of societal development and economic change. It's a crucial part of our overall theme, as it connects to how societies adapt and plan for the future in response to these demographic shifts. Let's take a closer look at what influences population size and density over time. First, E stands for emigration, which is the number of individuals leaving the habitat to go elsewhere during a specific period. Conversely, B represents the birth rate, or how many new individuals are born in the population. D is the death rate, indicating how many individuals die during that same period. The overall change in population depends on these factors. When more individuals are born and immigrate into the habitat, the population tends to grow. On the other hand, higher death rates and emigration lead to a decline. The equation n sub t equals n sub 0 plus the sum of b, and I minus d and e helps us quantify this change mathematically. Here, n0 is the initial population at the start, and nt is the population at a later time. The key idea is that natality, which is the birth rate, along with immigration, increases the population size and density. Meanwhile, mortality and emigration work to reduce it. It's important to understand that population density isn't static. It fluctuates over time based on various factors like competition, weather, predator pressure, and available food. All these elements influence whether the population grows or shrinks. In summary, the size of a population at any given time depends on these four basic processes: natality, mortality, immigration, and emigration. Together, they shape the dynamic nature of populations in their habitats. Let's take a closer look at population growth models. These models are essential for understanding how populations change over time. They help us predict future trends based on current data and assumptions. There are a few key types to keep in mind. First, the exponential growth model, which describes rapid, unchecked growth under ideal conditions. Then, there's the logistic growth model, which more realistically accounts for resource limitations and environmental carrying capacity. This results in a growth curve that levels off as the population reaches its maximum sustainable size. These models are fundamental because they connect to broader themes like sustainability, resource management, and environmental impact. By understanding how populations grow, we can better plan for future needs and challenges. Let's take a closer look at what this slide is telling us. First, we have K, which stands for carrying capacity. This is the maximum population size that the environment can sustain over time. Then, R represents the intrinsic rate of natural increase, which is basically how fast the population would grow under ideal conditions without any limitations. Now, the key idea here is that logistic growth, which is shown by this sigmoid or S-shaped curve, occurs when resources become limiting. Unlike exponential growth, where resources are unlimited, most animal populations face finite resources like food and space. As these resources become scarcer, growth slows down and eventually levels off, reaching the carrying capacity. The equation here, dn/dt equals Rn times the fraction, k minus n over k, captures this process mathematically. It shows how the rate of change in population size depends on the current population, the growth rate, and how close the population is to the environment's maximum capacity. When a population grows in a habitat with limited resources, this logistic growth pattern emerges naturally. It's a more realistic model because it reflects the real-world constraints that populations face. Finally, the Verhulst-Pearl model, represented by this equation, helps us understand and predict how populations will grow over time when resources are limited. It's a crucial concept because it links the biological growth processes to environmental constraints, which is central to understanding population dynamics overall. Let's take a closer look at population interactions. This slide highlights how populations don't exist in isolation. They interact with each other in various ways. Understanding these interactions is key to grasping how ecological communities function. For example, predator-prey relationships, competition for resources, and mutualistic partnerships all shape population dynamics. These interactions influence not just individual species, but the overall health and stability of ecosystems. By studying these interactions, we can better predict how changes in one population might ripple through the environment. This ties into the broader theme of how interconnected life is on Earth and the importance of maintaining balanced ecosystems. So, recognizing these interactions helps us appreciate the complexity and resilience of natural systems. Living organisms interact in a variety of ways to create complex biological communities. These interactions are fundamental to understanding how ecosystems function and maintain balance. When we talk about population interactions, we're referring to the relationships between different species living in the same area. These relationships can be cooperative, competitive, or even neutral. For example, some species might compete for the same resources, while others might help each other survive. Recognizing these interactions helps us see the bigger picture of how living organisms coexist and influence each other within their environments. This is a key part of understanding the overall health and stability of ecosystems. So, when we talk about interspecific interactions, we're really referring to the interactions that happen between populations of two different species. These relationships are fundamental because they can influence the survival, reproduction, and even the evolution of the species involved. Think of it as an ecological dance where each species impacts the other in some way. These interactions can be beneficial, harmful, or neutral, but understanding them helps us grasp the complex web of life. This concept ties into our overall theme of ecological relationships and how species coexist and compete within their environments. Keep in mind, these interactions shape ecosystems and drive biodiversity. So, on this slide, we're looking at the interaction of individuals of the same species, which is known as intraspecific interactions. These are the interactions that happen when members of the same species come into contact with each other. This can include a variety of behaviors, such as competition for resources, mates, or territory. It's important to understand that these interactions can be quite intense because they're all vying for the same limited resources, which can influence survival and reproductive success. For example, animals might establish dominance hierarchies or engage in aggressive displays to secure their place within the group. These interactions are a key part of the overall theme of how organisms adapt and compete within ecosystems. They help shape behaviors and population dynamics, influencing how species evolve over time. So, in summary, intraspecific interactions are fundamental to understanding how individuals of the same species coexist, compete, and influence each other's lives in their environment. Now, let's take a closer look at the different types of interactions that occur between species in an ecosystem, starting with predation, which is actually the first on this list. Predation involves one organism, the predator, hunting and consuming another, the prey. It's a classic example of a predator-prey relationship that helps regulate populations and maintain balance in nature. Next up is parasitism, where one organism benefits at the expense of another, the host. Parasites often live on or inside their hosts, extracting resources without immediately killing them. Think of ticks or tapeworms. Moving on, competition is a fundamental interaction where species compete for the same limited resources, like food, space, or mates. This competition can influence survival and reproductive success for the species involved. Then we have amensalism, a less obvious interaction where one species is harmed and the other is unaffected. A good example might be when a plant releases substances that inhibit the growth of nearby plants. Following that, commensalism is an interaction where one species benefits and the other remains unaffected. An example would be birds nesting in trees. They benefit from the shelter, but the tree isn't affected. Finally, mutualism is perhaps the most cooperative interaction, where both species benefit. Think of pollinators like bees and flowering plants. Both rely on each other for survival and reproduction. Understanding these interactions helps us see the complex web of relationships that sustain ecosystems and highlight the interconnectedness of all species involved. Let's talk about predation, which is a specific type of interaction between species. Predation involves one species killing and consuming another. The species doing the eating is called the predator, while the one being eaten is called the prey. This interaction plays a really important role in maintaining the balance within ecosystems. Predators help regulate prey populations, preventing them from becoming too numerous. When predator populations decrease, we often see an increase in prey populations because there are fewer predators to keep them in check. Understanding predation helps us see how different species influence each other and maintain the overall health and stability of their ecosystems. It's a key concept that fits into the bigger picture of how species interact in nature. Let's explore some fascinating examples of biological control methods, starting with insectivorous plants like Nepenthes, Drosera, and Utricularia. These plants have evolved specialized mechanisms to trap and digest insects, which helps them obtain nutrients in nutrient-poor environments. Moving on to carnivorous animals, such as tigers hunting deer or snakes preying on frogs. These predators play a vital role in maintaining the balance of ecosystems by controlling prey populations. Prey species, on the other hand, have developed various defense mechanisms to reduce their chances of being eaten. For example, some insects and frogs use camouflage, also known as cryptic coloration, to blend into their surroundings and avoid predators. This highlights the dynamic and interconnected nature of predator-prey relationships in biological control. Predation not only helps regulate populations, but also drives the evolution of remarkable adaptations in various species. Let's talk about competition. Remember, it's primarily about limited resources. But interestingly, in some cases, resources don't even have to be limited for competition to happen. For example, the feeding efficiency of one species might decrease because of interference from another species. This shows how competition can be more complex than just fighting over scarce resources. Now, competition isn't just between members of the same species. It can also occur between different species, which we call interspecific competition. And when competition happens within the same species, that's known as intraspecific competition. Both types play a crucial role in shaping how species interact and evolve within ecosystems. Understanding these different types of competition helps us see the broader picture of how species coexist, compete, and influence each other in the natural world. It ties back to the overall theme of ecological interactions and the delicate balance that sustains biodiversity. So this slide highlights a key concept in ecology known as Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. Essentially, it states that two species that are very closely related and compete for the same resources can't really coexist peacefully over the long term. The reason is that the species that's more efficient or better adapted will outcompete the other, leading to the elimination of the less competitive one. This idea emphasizes that competition is a powerful force shaping species distributions and community structure. When one species is considered the superior competitor, it tends to dominate, pushing the other out of the shared habitat. Now, we also see the term competitive release here, which is a fascinating concept. It refers to a situation where a species, that's normally limited to a small geographic area because of the presence of a stronger competitor, suddenly expands its range when that competitor is removed or reduced. For example, if we experimentally remove the superior competitor, the previously restricted species can thrive and occupy a much larger area than before. This concept ties into the overall theme of competition, showing how interactions between species can influence their geographic distribution and survival. It reminds us that competition isn't just about who wins or loses, but also about how species adapt and shift their ranges in response to these interactions. Let's take a closer look at parasitism. This is an interspecific interaction, meaning it happens between different species. In parasitism, one species, called the parasite, depends on the other species, known as the host, for food and shelter. The key point here is that the parasite benefits from this relationship, while the host gets harmed in the process. It's a sort of ecological relationship where the parasite gains resources at the expense of the host. Now, moving on to resource partitioning, this concept is all about how species coexist without directly competing for the exact same resources. When two species are competing for the same thing, one way they can avoid intense competition is by dividing their resources differently. For example, they might feed at different times of the day or use different foraging patterns. This way, they can share the environment more peacefully and sustainably. Both parasitism and resource partitioning are mechanisms that help species survive alongside each other. Parasites allow some species to exploit hosts without necessarily killing them outright, and resource partitioning helps species reduce direct competition, promoting biodiversity. These strategies are vital for maintaining the balance within ecosystems and are closely tied to the overall theme of ecological interactions and coexistence. Let's take a closer look at some key parasite adaptations. First, many parasites have a high reproductive capacity, which means they produce a large number of offspring to increase their chances of survival and transmission. Next, you'll notice that some parasites have developed the presence of suckers or hooks. These structures are essential because they help the parasite attach securely to their host, making sure they stay in place. Another fascinating adaptation is the loss of their digestive system. Since many parasites live inside their hosts and rely on the host's nutrients, they don't need a complex digestive system of their own. This streamlining saves energy and resources. Similarly, some parasites have lost their sense organs altogether. Because they are often in a stable environment within a host, they don't need to navigate or sense their surroundings like free-living organisms do. All of these features, high reproduction, attachment structures, and simplified body systems, are classic examples of how parasites have evolved specific adaptations for a parasitic lifestyle. These changes highlight the overall theme of how organisms can modify their biology to thrive in very specialized niches. Today, I want to highlight some fascinating examples of parasite adaptations that clearly show how these organisms have evolved to survive and thrive in their hosts. First, we have parasites like Ascaris, Taenia, and Plasmodium, which cause diseases in humans. Ascaris is a type of roundworm that infects the intestines, while Taenia, or tapeworm, also lives in our digestive system, often from undercooked meat. Then there's Plasmodium, the parasite responsible for malaria, transmitted through mosquito bites. These parasites have developed complex life cycles and adaptations to evade our immune systems and ensure their transmission. Next, consider head lice, which are another example of parasites that live directly on humans, feeding on blood and causing itching and discomfort. Their ability to cling tightly to hair and resist some treatments highlights their specialized adaptations for survival on the human scalp. Finally, there's Cuscuta, commonly known as dodder or shoe flower plant, which is a parasitic plant that grows on other plants, like shoe flower. It lacks chlorophyll and relies entirely on its host for nutrients, demonstrating how plants have also evolved parasitic strategies to extract resources from their hosts. All these examples underscore the incredible diversity of parasite adaptations across different organisms and hosts, fitting into the larger theme of how parasitism drives evolutionary change and specialization. So today we're looking at a specific type of interspecific interaction, and this is called commensalism. Essentially, in this relationship, one species benefits, while the other species is neither harmed nor helped. It's a bit different from other interactions like mutualism or parasitism because the species that doesn't benefit or suffer remains unaffected. An example of this might be barnacles attaching to a whale. The barnacles get a free ride and access to food sources, but the whale isn't impacted by their presence. This kind of relationship is important to understand because it shows how species can coexist in ways that don't necessarily involve direct competition or harm. It ties into the larger theme of how diverse interactions shape ecosystems and influence species survival. Now let's look at some interesting examples of commensalism. First, we have the association between egrets and grazing cattle. The egrets often follow cattle as they graze, feeding on insects stirred up by the movement. The cattle aren't affected by the egret's presence, but the egrets benefit by gaining easy access to food. Next, consider barnacles growing on the backs of whales. The barnacles attach themselves to the whale's skin, gaining a free ride through the water and access to food sources, like plankton. The whale, however, doesn't seem to be harmed or benefited significantly. It's a classic example of commensalism. Then there's the case of epiphytes, such as orchids, growing on tree branches. These plants use the trees as a support to reach better light and air exposure, but they don't harm the tree itself. All these examples illustrate a key point about commensalism. One species benefits, while the other is neither harmed nor helped. Understanding these relationships helps us see how different organisms coexist in complex ecosystems, often in ways that may seem subtle but are crucial for biodiversity. Today, let's talk about interspecific interactions, specifically those in which both species involved actually benefit. This type of interaction is called mutualism. Mutualism is a fascinating concept because it highlights how different species can work together in ways that are advantageous for both. It's a great example of cooperation in nature, where each species gains something essential from the other. This kind of relationship is crucial for maintaining the balance and health of ecosystems. As we continue exploring ecological interactions, keep in mind that mutualism not only promotes survival, but also fosters diversity and resilience within habitats. So, understanding mutualism helps us see the interconnectedness of life and the importance of mutual support in the natural world. Plants depend on insects for pollination, and in return, they often give insects nectar or pollen as a source of food. This mutual relationship benefits both parties. Plants get their pollen transferred, allowing them to reproduce, while insects gain nourishment. Next, let's talk about mycorrhiza, which is a fascinating association between fungi and the roots of higher plants. This relationship helps plants absorb nutrients more efficiently from the soil, and in return, fungi receive sugars and other organic compounds from the plants. It's a great example of mutualism in nature. We also have lichens, which are partnerships between fungi and algae or cyanobacteria. In this relationship, the fungus provides a protective structure, while the algae or cyanobacteria conduct photosynthesis, producing food that both organisms share. These examples, plants with insects, mycorrhiza, and lichens, are all wonderful illustrations of mutualism, where both species benefit. They highlight how interconnected and cooperative life can be in ecosystems, supporting the overall health of the environment. Now, let's talk about a specific type of interspecific interaction called amensalism. This is when one species is harmed, but the other species isn't affected one way or the other. It's a one-sided relationship. A classic example of this is penicillium, the mold that produces the antibiotic penicillin. It secretes this chemical, which kills bacteria nearby. What's important to remember here is that in amensalism, the effect on the other species is neutral, no benefit, no harm, while the harmed species experiences negative effects. This concept helps us understand the complex ways species interact in ecosystems, and it ties into the larger theme of how organisms influence each other's survival and growth. Now, let's take a moment to summarize the different types of population interactions we've discussed. On this slide, you see a table that highlights how two species can interact with each other across various relationships. Starting with predation, we see that it benefits species A, which is the predator, while it harms species B, the prey. This is a classic example of one species benefiting at the expense of another. Next, competition involves both species negatively impacting each other because they are competing for the same resources. So, both have a minus sign here, indicating mutual harm. Parasitism is interesting because it benefits species A, the parasite, while negatively affecting species B, the host. It's a one-sided benefit that can have serious consequences for the host. Moving on to commensalism, we see that species A benefits, but species B isn't affected at all, represented by the 0. This shows how one species can gain without harming or helping the other. In amensalism, the opposite occurs. Species A is unaffected, but species B is harmed, again with a negative impact on one side and no effect on the other. Finally, mutualism benefits both species, so both have a plus sign. This is an ideal scenario where both populations thrive because of their interaction. Overall, these interactions illustrate the complex web of relationships that shape ecosystems. They demonstrate how species can influence each other's survival and success, which is central to understanding ecological balance and biodiversity.